Welcome to the show, everyone. Today we have producer Kyle on the mic with us today. How you doing this morning, Kyle?
Oh, I'm living the dream, Ben. I appreciate being here. I'm glad to get this thing going. Let's do this thing, man.
Let's do it. And our guest today is someone I've met once or twice before, the Vice President of Finance at LGI Homes, which we'll talk a little bit more about in a few minutes. But David Wiggins, how are you today?
I am fantastic. Thanks for having me on the show.
It's a pleasure to have you here. So we will get right into our usual icebreaker question. It's one of our favorites. What is your favorite superpower? And I'm going to let me preface this by saying you told me last night that I was going to really enjoy the answer. You said something about it, but you wouldn't spoil the ending for me. So now let's have it.
So my answer to this question has actually changed a fair bit from when I was a kid. When I was a kid, it was probably Cyclops. I really liked being able to shoot lasers out of your eyes. But as I've gotten a little bit older and I've gotten a little bit more perspective, there is a DC comic that kind of combines a lot of the different superheroes, and it's a graphic novel called Kingdom Come. And one of the things that Kingdom Come explores is the relationship that society has with superheroes, in universe, which could be extrapolated and you could extrapolate that out to politicians and business leaders and things like that. And there's this expectation that society has that superheroes are going to come in and fix all the problems. And it ends up being very, very negative for everyone involved, for society, for the superheroes, for everybody. And that, to me, is the basic idea that has colored what my answer to that question now would be, which would be in the DC universe, it would be Batman. In the Marvel universe, it would be Iron Man. And the reason for that is because they don't have superpowers. The reason for that is because they have focus, they have learned expertise, and they have application of resources. And those are the superpowers that anybody can have.
That's a great answer. Yes, I'm glad you hit application of resources at the end, because I would add to that the only thing I would add to that would be application of a lot of resources.
Hey, everybody works with what they have.
That's certainly true. And that's a great answer. One thing that struck me about what you just said was the idea. So in X-Men, which I think X-Men was the thing that started the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Like the success of X-Men was what led us down the road to then. I think X-Men prompted, certainly from a producerial standpoint, it prompted Transformers, but it also prompted, which obviously Transformers is not based on a comic book per se, but it's
kind of in a similar vein.
It's in a similar vein, but it also was this is the big visual effect, like this direction of filmmaking can be very successful. And so in X-Men, the idea was superheroes are the problem instead of they're supposed to come in and fix the problem, which both of those perspectives are incorrect. Like we have to solve our own problems. But you're right. In Kingdom Come, the idea was, why didn't you fix this for us? And I find that that opposition interesting. You got any thoughts, Kyle?
Yeah, I mean, a little bit on kind of, I'm more of a Marvel guy, but I do like the DC universe. And talking about Kingdom Come, I mean, this sounds awesome. It's like a nice little political thriller that would be pretty cool to explore, but kind of reminds me of Civil War. They, on the Marvel comics, to where, they are put in this place, but, they save the world, but they're doing a lot of harm at the same time. So the government gets involved, and then it's like, well, we have to regulate our heroes and this and that. So I kind of can see where, like, it's not only a political thing, but it's like, why aren't you doing this? Like, why aren't you helping us when you're actually hurting us? But I don't know. Pretty cool.
It seems like in a lot of superhero stories, the crux of the issue is agency, either for humans or for superheroes, but exploring the amount of freedom that a given intelligent being should have to self-actualize. And I tend to, on that side, I tend to fall on give people a lot of freedom, make resources available, but and be willing to teach, but don't squeeze, don't hold too tight. That's just my opinion. So, spoiler alert: you and I are brothers. So,
unfortunately,
so tell us about your history with College Station and Texas A&M.
So I grew up in College Station, like you did, and grew up in a mostly great family. Not entirely, but so from the time I was born to the time that I graduated A&M at 24, I took a year off, and then I took 5 years in school. I spent 23 of those 24 years in College Station. So this is definitely the hometown, and I arrived on campus in spring of 2007 and graduated in May of 2011 with a bachelor's in economics.
And how do you think so you work in finance, obviously. You're the vice president of finance at LGI Homes. We'll talk a little bit more about the company later. But how do you think your perspective is different from others, even other finance people, being a second generation economist, the son of an economist? Our dad teaches economics here at Texas A&M. How do you think that flavored your perspective on things?
I think that as an economist, and particularly, the way that you and I were both brought up thinking, I feel like we have a more instinctive understanding of opportunity cost than you might find in someone who picked it up later in life. And that is because it's not just money. It's not just financial cost. There's all of these different costs associated with taking one action over another. And that, to me, has really instilled a very, very strong sense of the importance of efficiency. And you'll see that a fair bit in the finance community, but I do feel that came a little more naturally as the son of an economist.
Now, I'm currently taking y'all's dad's course, and I am far from an economist by any stretch of the measure. But I've heard in previous podcasts, Ben kind of talked about there's a certain lecture that your father would give, and a lot of people would show up from any major to listen to it. But to have his mind growing up and to understand when you were talking about opportunity costs, like what it really means, and since you grew up with that, how big of an influence has your dad been to you guys?
Tremendous. An absolutely tremendous influence.
Yes. So, I mean, obviously nobody's perfect, but they say, I say this to my wife from time to time, my lovely wife. Hello, Madison. I say this, many men become their fathers. Like a lot of guys see themselves turning into their fathers as they get older. And I'm not sure that that's entirely the case with me, but it's not. I think with a lot of guys, they think, I don't want to become my dad, or there are a lot of aspects in which I don't want to become my dad. And for me, for the most part, I'm very comfortable with just kind of growing into being that guy. I would consider that a tremendous honor.
I agree.
So, he and I are different in subtle ways, but I think we're probably more similar. I'm more similar to him than you are.
I actually would have said the same thing.
Oh, okay. So you're better with money than I am. I think he and I think a little more alike about some things. I don't know. So this is interesting. Let's dig into this.
All right.
So what would you? So let's hear your side of it. No, I'm more like Dad.
So, I would just say, honestly, the reason that I thought that is, the career paths that we've followed, where I have done one that is a little bit more, I guess what you would call standard,
traditional,
and a little bit more traditional career arc, and you've gotten a lot of great experience out of this, but you've gone into several different industries, and that's just kind of the way that thought process evolved.
Mm-hmm. There was something else that we touched on earlier. So you have been interested in money. You became a finance guy, but from an early age, you were interested in money, earning it, saving it, understanding how it works. What do you think made you interested in money and then later in finance?
So I think you know this, and I think most of the listeners will, but money buys you stuff. and I have always, I've always liked just being able to get the things that I want. And I like being able to, if I don't feel like cooking, just go out to eat. And I figured out fairly early on that my desire to do those things was going to be fairly intricately tied up in money, and so I made it my business to figure out how it works. And that's kind of how I got there.
Here we are.
And then finance, combines what we've talked about in terms of understanding of opportunity cost and understanding of basic economic principles, combined specifically with money. Mm-hmm. So it just kind of made sense.
So you originally went to the University of Texas. Mm-hmm. What made you go there, and then what made you come back?
So, as we've touched on, having grown up in College Station, I wanted to get as far away as possible while still remaining fairly close, geographically, and so the University of Texas made a lot of sense. It's a good school, and it checked those boxes. I figured out very quickly that there's a reason that people consider Austin and College Station to be very, very different culturally, and they are. And it was a tremendous culture shock. Mm-hmm. It was, at 18 years old, it was difficult for me to deal with, and that ended up not being a great fit, and I did not have the best experience, not from any fault of the school, not from any fault of the people there. It just wasn't a good fit for me, and I didn't like the person that I was becoming. And so I decided to, I previously mentioned that I took a year off. So I took a year off after a summer and a fall there. And then I transferred back to A&M because I wanted to get back to the environment where I'd been more successful.
One other question about that. So you and I have talked a lot about locus of control. Mm-hmm. And one of the differences so I am probably more socially liberal than you are, but you and I are both, I would say, economic conservatives. Mm-hmm. And one of the reasons that I think we are that way is because economic conservatism, and I'm probably a little more liberal than you are economically, but not much. And I think,
I don't know.
So I think that one of the issues or two of the issues that you and I focus on in our more conservative economic positions are locus of control and moral hazard. Mm-hmm. And so do you think that, and obviously this is a sweeping generalization, do you think that people from more conservative cultures like College Station are more likely to have an internal locus of control. And do you feel like that fits better for you as well?
That's a tough one. So my initial knee-jerk reaction would be no. But thinking through it, so what does an internal locus of control mean? It means that I am most responsible for the quality of my life. The quality of my life is not dictated by outside forces. The quality of my life is dictated by my own reaction to my external environment, my own attitudes, my own behaviors. And if you extrapolate that out, what that means is your locus of control can change. And it's a natural extension of that. And if your locus of control can change, then certainly exposure to people with internal loci of control, you might have a greater chance of exposure to that in a conservative environment, and you might see the benefits of adopting that kind of attitude about the world. So my initial knee-jerk reaction would be no, but now that I've thought through it a little bit more, I think probably the answer is yes.
Interesting. By the way, I mean, I fully acknowledge that there are things that are highly determinative in how our lives go certainly from the outside looking in terms of racial privilege, gender privilege,
of course,
those kinds of things, sexual orientation privilege, etc. But interesting thoughts. Thank you for that. So after college, you started work in the consulting world at Ocean Tomo.
Yes, I
What
did.
were the biggest things that surprised you about that experience? What subverted your expectations? What do you think might surprise our listeners?
So I really wanted to get into consulting. I saw the work that Dad had done, and I saw the kinds of questions he was answering, and I saw the solving of puzzles, so to speak.
Mm-hmm.
And I said that sounds like a pretty cool way to make a living. As it turns out, the work that you do as a tenured professor at a flagship university with a PhD in economics from MIT is a little different than the work that you do with bachelor's in economics. And honestly, I was a little bit naive going into it. It was brutally difficult from a scheduling perspective. The hours were very, very long. And so the expectations for the work, my expectations for the type of work were a little bit subverted. And that was, by the way, 100% my fault. That was not a misrepresentation from that company to me. It was just, I just hadn't made it all the way through the thought process of, what's this going to be like? And I should have. And it's very popular, particularly over here on West Campus, for people to talk about, being perfectly willing to work 60-hour weeks. People talk about work 70, 80 hours a week and talk about, if you're going to have a good career, whether you go into law, whether you go into consulting, whether you go into accounting, whether you go into industry, you're going to put in that kind of time. And that's true. There will be times in that. And I guess I want to make 2 points here. One is that is true, but in some of those professions, the expectation is you do this all the time. And in some of those professions, when the fat's in the fire, you might work 90 or 100 hours a week. But generally, the expectation is it's a little bit more reasonable. And what was surprising to me is working 70 hours, working 80 hours is not the hard part. And you know this too from some of your experiences. The hard part is not doing the work. The hard part is not doing your laundry. The hard part is not being able to go get groceries. The hard part is once you get north of about 85, now you're cutting into sleep. And I mean, social goes out the window around 65. Basic household chores go out around 75, and sleep goes out around 85. And you know, the people who want to do that full time for their career, good on them. I think that's great, and there's a reason those people are compensated the way that they are. I'll pass.
Fair enough. So you made a change. Now you work at LGI Homes. I'm going to brag on you guys for a second. Fortune's 10th fastest growing company in America. LGI is ranked 38th in the country by earnings per share 3-year growth, 21st in the country by revenue 3-year growth, and 15th by 3-year total return, that being stock return. Obviously, you're full of regret for having gone there. What made you choose LGI?
So, I was working at Ocean Tomo, and by the way, the people that I worked with there, I have nothing but great things to say. And they were supportive, and they knew that it wasn't a good fit, and they were actually supportive of the interview process. And so I was interviewing at a couple of different places. I was interviewing at LGI, and I was interviewing at an oil and gas firm. And before I went to either of the interviews, I was actually more excited about the oil and gas interview because, you know, home building is, as I'm thinking at the time, well, home building is a super risky industry. I need to get into oil and gas where it's safe. This is in mid 2012, so that shows how much I knew. And so I interviewed originally for an acquisitions analyst position. Mm-hmm. You know, the guys who go out and acquire land for us to build the houses on. And so I would have been working for the vice president of acquisitions, and I arrived that day, and Sandy, the receptionist, said, "You'll actually be interviewing with Eric today." I said, "Oh, okay. Well, who's Eric?" She said, "He's the CEO." I said, "Okay, let's do this." And so Jack, the vice president of acquisitions, was sitting in on the interview, mm-hmm. and Eric had brought in a small army of people for training purposes. So we commenced to have about a 3.5-hour interview in front of 8 people, where he asked very, very probing questions, including, you know, what is the worst business decision that I ever made, and I ended up talking badly about a company that he'd been involved with previously.
Oh, great.
And so kind of put my foot in my mouth a little bit. But I don't know if you have ever met Eric or Jack, but they're both very engaging people and very, very obviously smart and capable and passionate about what they do. And when you get in the room with somebody like that, it makes you sit up and take notice.
Mm-hmm. No doubt.
So they called me back and said, "Well, we actually like somebody else better for the acquisitions analyst spot, but if you're open-minded to it, we are considering creating a financial analyst position, which would work with our CFO, and it would take the financial underwriting aspects of the acquisitions process. We're going to split that off into this role, as well as doing the master forecasting and helping out just kind of more generally with finance functions, as well as some accounting." And I said, "Well, that actually sounds like a much better fit." because one of the things that I actually didn't mention about Ocean Tomo is, probably the most valuable thing that I got from that was some pretty high end Excel skills, because the faster you worked in Excel, the more you got to sleep, and that was a wonderful motivation. And there was a time actually when we had a week where we weren't on a client engagement. And so what I did was I took my mouse and I locked it in a drawer in my desk, and I recreated the exhibits that I'd done for the previous engagement without using a mouse, to learn the keyboard hotkeys. And you can work a lot faster if you're not moving your right hand back and forth between the mouse and the keyboard. So if there are 10 or 15 keyboard shortcuts that you're using all the time, you can actually make a tremendous difference in how quickly you can get things done. That was something that I had learned at Ocean Tomo, and it was something that I knew was valuable, and I would be able to squeeze a lot more juice out of it in a role that was more Excel focused. So I was very excited about interviewing for the financial analyst position. And so I came back, and this was Eric and the CFO Charles, who I ended up working for. And so Charles pulled up the master forecast because he hadn't actually been in the previous interview. I think he was the only person in the company who wasn't present in the previous interview. So he pulled up the master forecast, which was a very large Excel file. It was at the time, I think it was 35, 40 megabytes. It had a tab for every project. It was pretty much what you would expect for a master financial forecast for a $30 million company. It was, very, very advanced Excel formulas and 100% in Excel. And with a Microsoft Access backend. And so he started showing me around the file, and I said, do you mind? And I grabbed the keyboard from him and started navigating around, and the rest is history.
Mm-hmm.
Nice.
There you go. So then let's fast forward a few years. You moved. What were the different titles that you held with the company? And I'm going to move to talking about the IPO momentarily. Mm-hmm. So, but they brought you in as a financial analyst, and then.
So September 12th, 2012, I was brought in as a financial analyst. June of 2013, I was promoted to senior financial analyst. July of 2014, I was promoted to director of finance and treasury. And June of 2018, I was promoted to vice president of finance.
When was the IPO?
The IPO was November 7th, 2013.
Okay, so you were not yet the director of finance.
No.
Okay, interesting. I think a lot of our listeners and a lot of people involved with Mays Business School would be interested in hearing firsthand about what an IPO is like. So obviously there was a lot of work to be done, but let's talk about the specifics. What was the same about your work during that time? What was different? Walk us through the IPO process.
So, and I can't speak about IPOs generally, but I can speak about LGIs.
Right.
So we were growing very, very quickly, even during the IPO process. So you don't get to take 6 months off and go public and then come back. You still have to operate the business. And most companies that are going public are going to be doing it in a time of pretty rapid growth. So you kind of have your day job and your night job. So your day job is keeping the business running. Mm-hmm. Your day job is, whatever it was that you were doing before, you still have to do. And I'm sure this isn't true of some companies. I would imagine large companies have deal teams that basically handle the aspects of going public. But then as you get to about 3:30, 4 o'clock, you've kind of done all the things that you need to do for keeping the operation running. Mm-hmm. And then you start on your work for the audit. And we actually had to get re-audited for several years back, because it was we were using a different accounting firm. We were using a different accounting firm than we had used historically, and to get comfortable with the financial statements, they had to actually go back and re-audit all of the periods that we would report on in our S1, as well as our first 10K.
Yeah.
So, it was honestly a ton of fun.
Yeah.
A ton of work. That was the only time that I have worked those kind of hours at LGI, was that summer that we went public. And
Ballpark it. How many hours a week, roughly?
max was 90 at LGI. That summer on average, probably 70.
Okay.
Whereas right now it's 45. And that kind of slowly tapered down in the 3 years, 3 to 4 years following the IPO.
Okay.
It slowly tapered back to something a little bit more normalized. And the reason for both the increase and the then tapering is large companies have fundamentally different requirements than small companies. Large companies have regulatory requirements, and it obviously depends on the type of business. You might have OCC requirements. You might have, if you're public, obviously, or have public debt, you have SEC requirements, and if you're public, you have to be Sarbanes-Oxley compliant. So I remember a story where our audit partner walked into the office and said, so show me your capitalized interest schedule. And kind of looked at him and said, capitalized interest schedule? We just expense our interest. All of it. we just flush it through the P&L, and that's more conservative, right? And he kind of looks at us and says, make a capitalized interest schedule. And it was one of those things where, as a private company, because you're not misstating anything for the IRS, you're not doing anything unethical. It's just you are required to do a lot of things that, strictly from a business perspective, are of questionable value. How much value do you really get out of capitalizing interest as a private company? Come on. It's not something that's real. It's accounting voodoo. And
Shannon enjoys accounting voodoo.
Yeah. And our audit partner right now would probably be tearing out his hair if he was listening to this. But it's something that, once you get to a certain size, it makes sense. It makes sense that everybody reports it in generally the same way. And so I understand for Coca-Cola, for GE, for NBC, for large companies, I understand. But making that transition is difficult, and adopting an attitude, which over the years I have had to adopt an attitude where I see the value in that stuff, and that is just one example. There are 25 different things that we just hadn't ever done before that, as part of the going public process, you just have to start doing. We became acquainted with the process of printing a financial document, which is exciting. You can do it on site. We did the IPO on site. We haven't done subsequent ones on site. But basically, the way it works is you go to the printer's office, and you have the team from the company, you have the team from the auditors, you have the team from the underwriting investment banks,
Right.
and then you have the lawyers. And you have lawyers for all of those different groups, not the auditors, but you have lawyers for the underwriters and you have lawyers for the company.
Mm-hmm.
So you have 5 different groups of people,
All descending on.
yes, all descending on this building that's basically nothing but conference rooms and printers, and a lot of candy, some liquor. They order in great food. That's nice.
Yeah.
And we actually had a very good experience at the printers. We had a very good relationship with our underwriters, still do. Tom Bradshaw at Deutsche Bank was the partner in charge. We had a great relationship with EY, still do. And we actually found our outside counsel in that process, because the lead attorney for the underwriters did such a great job that after the process to go public was done, we hired him as our lead outside counsel.
Yeah.
So we switched over to Baker Botts, a guy named Tim Taylor.
So are there facilities that are devoted to just this, to doing just printing for IPOs and stuff like that?
Yeah, IPOs, S1s, S3s, 10Ks, 10Qs, any kind of prospectus.
Mm-hmm.
So you see people walking around, the major investment banking areas, and and what you see is the lead banker. You see the CEO, the CFO, anybody else from the company who's fortunate enough to go, and then you'll see the junior investment banker scurrying along behind everybody, carrying a banker box full of prospectuses, which you're actually required to provide, which no one uses.
I like any process that involves someone scurrying.
Yes.
And also, this sounds to me like the only way you could get close to the experience of what it was like to work at an old school newspaper.
Yes.
Where you've got somebody standing around with a cigar. Stop the press. We gotta redo all of this.
Yes.
So
so what you do is you have all of these people, and you're wordsmithing, and you're frantically working to get this document together. And by the way, you got to do it before the next government shutdown. Mm-hmm. And there's you'll get an SEC comment, and it was actually kind of funny. Our lawyers and consultants told us, no, the CEO cannot just call the SEC. Well, Eric did. Oh, okay. and it ended up clearing up the issue. There was a question, and Eric said, well, let me just get on the phone. No, you can't do that. You got to go through lawyers. You got to go through the process. No, I'm just going to call them. I'm going to talk to them.
Yeah.
I don't remember what the issue was, but I remember it didn't last very long. So anyway, you're at the printer, and you have this 200-page document, about that thick for us. If it was a larger company, it would be bigger. So the same number appears in that document anywhere from 10 to 50 times. So you're recalculating on the schedule, and the auditors have to sign off on every single number. The company has to sign off on every single number, and the underwriters have to agree. And so what'll happen is someone will ask a question, which will require a schedule to be recalculated. And then when you recalculate it, you'll realize that it was off by 0.1. And then you have to track it. You have to go through, find every instance of that number, and submit a list of change pages to the printers. You take it to them, and they have to run it through the process. And it's not just a word processor. Financial printing is it's substantially different. So, doing a turn can take anywhere from 20 minutes to 5 hours to actually move the individual letters.
And now it sounds like production revisions on television scripts.
Okay.
When we do, the joke dies at the table read, and the executive producer, first of all, throws their script out the window and, curses out everyone in the room, and it just drops their water bottle and leaves. Not that I've ever seen anything like that happen. but then they go back, they write up a new joke, swearing the entire time. And then you push the script pages, and what you do is you push one version that's just the revised pages, and then you push another version that is the whole script with the revised pages, so that you can choose. You can either choose to save trees and, pull out the old pages and put in the new ones, or you can just print the entire script as it exists now. And so that's always an amusing process, especially when it happens 3 times in the same day. So,
yep.
Yeah. So,
that sounds awfully familiar.
Yep. Been through that one. Okay. So then you mentioned how things have kind of ramped down since the IPO ended. So what is as things have changed, how has your day-to-day changed? You mentioned that, your average work week is 45 hours or so. What is your day-to-day like now? And how has that changed since the IPO? How big is your team? How do you divide your time? What is for one of our listeners who might be interested in doing what you do, what does your job look like?
So, let me preface by saying the ideal mix at least at my company is 80 to 90% people and 10 to 20% stuff.
Okay.
For someone who is in management, particularly management at a little bit higher level, because if you have one person on the team, then you're going to be doing more stuff and a little bit less. You're going to have to manage them a little bit less because you only have one person on your team. You're only having to do one set of goals per month. You only have to follow with one person, and you only have to make sure that you're on the same page with one person, which takes a little bit more than you might expect. So the way that my day-to-day has changed is, call it the summer of the IPO. What we're doing is frantically building infrastructure, frantically, getting just get it done.
Scurrying.
Yes. Scurrying,
as it were,
scurrying around, building, complex Excel files and things like that, to do these calculations that we've never done before. Arguing with the auditors about, a lot of them and losing almost all the arguments. and so that summer is actually when I made my first hire. That was when I was promoted into management as a senior financial analyst. So, that was still almost 100% doing. And particularly, building the beginnings of the infrastructure of a major company. So that was what the work was like then. Now, so I have a team of 4, and that covers finance, treasury, and business intelligence. And I still do probably a little too much stuff. I would say that I'm 65-35 people and stuff. Now we're 5 years later. We have implemented an ERP software. We have, several generations of infrastructure in. We've got a pretty good set of stuff. It's much better. It's much more efficient than it used to be. And so the need for, call it frantic product development, product being a pretty broad term. It can be an Excel file. It can be a back-end SQL query. It can be, It can be automated calculations or just doing something on the back of the napkin. That need has dropped a fair bit. Now, the nice thing about this stuff, and I'm gonna plug business intelligence a little bit. The nice thing about that is it all builds on itself. If you put, I'll give you an example. To put together an inventory and sales report for the entire country for LGI Homes, you only need about 5 pieces of information. You need to know land status. Is it raw land? Is it land under development where we're putting in the roads right now? Or is it a finished lot ready to have a house built on it? You need to know purchase status. Is it under contract or have we actually bought it from the seller? You need to know construction status. Is it in foundation? Is it in frame? Is it in finals? Is it complete? And you need to know sales status. Is there no contract on it? Is there a pending contract to a customer on it, or has it closed? And then you need to know the dollars. How much have we spent? That's it. That's all there is. And so if you build those 5 things where they can be referenced by any person, product, or program that is connected to our SQL server, well, you just saved yourself a lot of time down the road because, inventory gets referenced all the time. It's very inventory heavy business. And if you do that, then it really makes your job a lot easier because you don't have to recreate the wheel. You just go pull off the shelf the code that you wrote 3-4 years ago. It still works. It's been executed 1 million times. And so once we switched over to mostly SQL infrastructure, the speed at which we had to develop new products went down. It's just a lot more scalable.
So briefly, it sounds like being able to work with Excel, obviously, in terms of software capabilities for someone who would want to work toward a career path like yours, Excel is a big one. Access. What sort of software capabilities would you most recommend someone develop if they wanted to do your job in 10 years?
Someone who's in school right now?
Sure. Or someone who's considering coming back to school, for example.
Okay. So take all the Excel classes that you can, all of them, whatever number you're thinking of, triple it, and then take certifications on the side and use Excel. Use Excel in your personal life. Use Excel to make your personal budget. Use Excel to track your 401k if you're considering coming back to school. I understand that Fidelity is going to do it for you, but do it because using that program is the most used business software in the world for a reason. The flexibility is just incredible. And using it to solve a problem is excellent practice. Whether that's something that is going on in your personal life, whether that's something that you're tracking in business, you just have to use it. And Excel is by far the number one. Access is a good one to learn. Access is a pretty crappy database software. It's not good. Okay. But it teaches you how databases work, and it does it in a way that is much more approachable than staring at lines of code on a screen. You have your I forget what it's called, but you have basically your placemat that you put tables on, and then you draw lines between them and what you're doing. And you can actually right click that tab, switch over to SQL view. You're actually writing SQL code. You're just doing it with a visual interface. And for whatever reason, so Microsoft has its own dialect of SQL. It's called Transact SQL or T-SQL, which is not the dialect that Access writes in. There's a completely different Gorilla SQL that Access creates It uses slightly different syntax. It uses slightly different punctuation. So if you're going to start working with databases, you want to get away from Access as quickly as possible. But if you've never worked with databases, Access is a wonderful way to get some exposure.
Okay. So shifting gears slightly, I know from knowing you personally that you spend a lot of time thinking about leadership. And you mentioned a moment ago that your time is 65% people right now, and you're trying to make it more than that. Mm-hmm. So what are the most counterintuitive things that you've learned about leading teams?
How do you get promoted into management?
Are you asking me?
Mm-hmm.
Well, the way I get promoted into management is to knife everybody else in the back until they don't have any options other than me. Or to go to the dean of graduate programs and say, I really want to start this podcast. We should start this together. And if they say yes to you, then you're in management.
Yeah. So what you have just described is you have described, other than the knifing in the back, you have described someone who is solving problems. You have described someone who is identifying something and saying, I want to take this. This is something that needs to happen. I'm going to take it. I'm going to put it on my plate. I'm going to take it off of your plate. I'm going to put it on my plate, and I'm going to make it so you don't have to worry about it anymore. And by the way, once I'm done, I expect to be recognized for it. I expect to be rewarded for it because I'm doing my job. I'm making your life easier. When you move into management, all that kind of flips. I'm taking things off of my plate and I'm putting them on your plate.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm going to manage your time because my time is best used managing your time and managing their time and managing her time and his time. And frankly, this is not the best use of my time, but it is the best use of your time, so I'm going to take it off of my plate and put it on to your plate, which is a very, very difficult transition to do when you have had the approach of, I'm going to hoard. I'm going to get everything that I can. I'm going to get the most complicated, ridiculous processes, and I'm going to do the stuff that nobody wants to do. Transitioning to, and it's not really a negative thing, saying I'm going to move stuff from me to you. But it really takes some getting used to.
I think the key dynamic in what you're describing is and jokes aside, Shannon and I talked about this podcast years ago, and we identified a need for Mays Business School and the Mays full-time MBA program to be playing in the digital media space in a way that it had not been previously. And so playing off of what you just said, when you are hoarding, to use your word, when you're grabbing as much of the undesirable work as you can, or maybe not necessarily undesirable work, like in the case of this podcast, it was sort of cognitively difficult work in terms of what would this even look like? Like, where would we find guests? How do we start a podcast? And thankfully I had done that a little bit previously, but like something like this, this is just at a completely different level. And so when you're hoarding, the focus is on taking the work. When you move into management, and this is sort of implicit in what you just described, the emphasis is on finding ways to properly communicate the work that needs to be done, and then the recognition. Because you said, I expect you early on in your description, you said, if I do this, I expect to be recognized for it. Yeah. I want to move into management. And then once you are in management, the idea of rewarding people and communicating clearly with them, and then making sure that they understand that you know what they want and that you will align your incentives with theirs, and then the whole team can actually move together. Mm-hmm. Is that right?
Yes. Yeah, you hit the nail on the head. And yes, so figuring out, because when you're managing people, you have to figure out what do your people want? What are their goals? Mm-hmm. And you you touched on it. How does working at this company help me achieve my goals? From the perspective of one of my people, because I know that my team does not have a picture of me on the mantle of their fireplace at home. It's not up there. They are there for them, and they're there to accomplish their own goals, and they should be. Like some people might look at that and think it's negative that people are there for selfish reasons, but we're all here for selfish reasons. We all want to accomplish the goals that we want. And so there's something that that I've had to work very hard to develop as a manager. It's something that we like to call window mirror maturity. And I'm not sure where it originally came from. I think it came from a book, but I don't know offhand which one. Where, particularly when you are in leadership, when things go wrong, you're looking in the mirror, and when things go right, you're looking out the window. And you take the blame and distribute the credit. And that is, again, a little fundamentally different, because when you're an individual contributor, there's a little bit of self-promotion that's involved. It's kind of the way the game is played. But how many stories have you heard about somebody pissed off because their manager took all the credit for all their hard work? Sure. Happens all the time.
All the time.
And that is poor management. Because at the end of the day, as a manager, even if you did the work, find a way to push the credit onto someone else, because you don't need it. You're in management. You don't need it. Your reward is the job getting done. Your reward is the company making money. And that, by the way, is one of the reasons why managers are so often compensated with stock.
Mm-hmm.
Because, you don't get the pat on the back. That's fine. And you gotta give it to somebody else, because you are taken care of in other ways.
So two things about that. The first is that I think as you get to the executive level, which is where you are now,
I wouldn't go quite that far, but thank you.
Vice president is often considered an executive level position, but regardless, so then getting your managers when something goes well, to like getting the second generation version of that, not just you doing it, but you making sure that everyone on your team is doing it. Like you keep pushing the credit downward, like making sure that pardon the expression, that the crap doesn't roll downhill, but the credit does roll downhill.
Yes.
That's really important.
Yes.
And then the second thing was, you were talking about window mirror maturity. That's Bear Bryant. If something goes wrong, I did it. If something goes kind of right, we did it. If something goes right, you did it. That's all it takes to get people to win for you. That's the quote from the Bear. So he was an A&M guy, and also coached at another school.
Yeah,
at some point.
Can't remember which one.
So as we start to wind down, a lot of people don't understand the difference between accounting and finance. So from a very lay perspective, tell us a bit about how these departments interact.
So I would describe accounting is a language with which you describe what has happened and what is currently happening. Mm-hmm. And that's at its most fundamental level. That's all accounting is. It's a numerical way to codify what has happened and what is currently happening.
Codify, good word.
And finance, in my opinion, is a little bit more forward looking. It has a little bit more to do with capital planning. It has a little bit, and then you kind of have in between accounting and finance, you've got treasury. But finance, in my opinion, it's a little bit more strategic. It's a little bit more future looking. Mm-hmm. Now, that's not to say that one is more important than the other. They are complementary, and you can't really have one without the other. I would describe finances more forward-looking and accounting as more backward-looking and more about description rather than strategy for how to execute the business efficiently.
Okay. So how do you feel like your economics education and your economics background prepared you for your current work?
So I give a lot of credit to A&M here. I got a very, very broad education here at A&M in the economics department. So I had a bachelor's in economics, and I had a business minor with a business economics certification, which wasn't through the business school. It was through the economics department. And it just dictated a few of the economic electives that I had to take. So I had to take financial economics, for example.
Mm-hmm.
That really gave me what I believe to be a little bit more well-rounded perspective, and be able to approach problems that come up in business as they often do,
Mm-hmm.
With just a little bit different perspective, and that was not a result of the economics department. It was not a result of the business department. It was a result of both of them and the bang up job that they do working together and putting together programming that is germane and that is approachable. And, I'm sure logistically that can't be easy, figuring out, not only how does somebody get a degree, how does somebody get a degree involving cooperation between departments that are actually in different colleges. Mm-hmm. So that is something that I feel very fortunate to have experienced.
Germane is another good word. So what's the thing that surprised you other than Excel? So you can't say Excel, but the thing that surprised you the most in terms of knowledge or education you used much more than you would have expected? And what about much less than expected?
And I can't use Excel.
Can't, nope.
Because it is Excel. Let's see. Math.
Oh.
So yeah, you use a computer all the time, and you're not doing arithmetic in your head. Well, actually, often you are, but you don't have to. But being able to understand, the slightly more complex areas of math on a more instinctive level.
You're talking about like rate of return and things like that?
Rate of return and things like how do you calculate a gross margin, and not how do you calculate a gross margin based on numbers you already have. If you have to algebra it, well, if you want a 28% gross margin, you end up multiplying by about 1.4. And, it's very easy to sit there and think about it, and particularly you haven't been in school for a while. You think, okay, I want a 20% margin. I'm just going to multiply the cost times 1.28. Well, that's not actually quite right. You got to divide by 0.72. And maybe that is something that is very intuitive for some people. I'm not very good at math. So it was not super intuitive for me. But I learned.
Great. Let's move to some rapid fire questions. So in as few words as possible, what do you consider your most valuable failure?
My first management experience.
Okay.
I did not train the new financial analyst hardly at all. And it ended up having an effect on his career, and he ended up leaving the company. Mm. And by the way, he should have, because I'd screwed up.
Okay. What do you think is people's biggest misconception of you?
It's probably that I have a natural inclination towards left brain, analytical, mathematical stuff.
Okay.
I don't actually. I've always trended a little bit more towards the emotional, a little bit more towards words rather than numbers. But it's something that over the 7 years so far of my career, I've focused hard enough on it that my personality has actually shifted a little bit.
Interesting. As it turns out, money buys you stuff.
As it turns out.
So if you could choose anyone or almost anyone, I'll give you the caveat in just a second. If you could choose anyone as a mentor, who would it be? The caveat is you may choose a religious figure, but not from your own religion. Otherwise, anyone's in play, living or dead.
Napoleon.
So let's cheat the rapid fire process a little bit. Why Napoleon?
When you think of a dictator, what do you think of?
Iron Fist, My Way or the Highway.
Hitler, Mussolini.
I don't care.
Chairman Mao, Joseph Stalin.
I don't care what you think.
How did Napoleon rule?
Yeah, I imagine you're about to tell me.
I mean, have you ever heard of mass atrocities committed by Napoleon or his troops?
Not really. My only real familiarity with Napoleon is that he won a lot of battles. He lost at Waterloo, and he was really short.
He actually wasn't really short. He was average height.
Okay.
The French foot was a different measurement than the English foot at the time.
Yeah.
And so it ended up being, it was reported that he was, X feet high.
5'2" or whatever.
Yeah, 5'2", which, in English feet was very short, but in French feet was 5'7". Yeah. 5'7", and which at the time was perfectly normal. But from a propaganda perspective, it was useful for the English to portray Napoleon as this petulant child, so to speak, who was doing all these horrible things to the world to satisfy his own ego because he was so short and he just wanted to be a little taller.
Those height privileged Englishmen.
So to cheat the rapid fire a little bit, Napoleon united a tremendous amount of the world, and he did it, from what I can tell, compared with other dictators, largely without atrocity. He governed well. He was overthrown twice, but his family ended up coming back into power, and I'm sure there are things that I don't know about, and I'm sure that there are instances of bad behavior, but how hard do you have to think for instances of bad behavior for anyone with the level of authority that he had? And I just can't think of any. So he must have done a pretty good job.
Very interesting. So what is your fondest memory of Texas A&M?
Nebraska in 2010.
Ah, okay. That's a good answer. One of my fondest memories is Nebraska 1998. I was at that game. I fully expected a bad beating. And we ended up winning 28-21, as I recall, but we were up 28-7 at the start of the fourth quarter. And it was as close as I've been to complete anarchy in a football stadium. And we won the Big 12 championship that year.
Yeah. Reggie McNeil over OU wasn't
at that game. I was playing at that time.
Yeah. That was a good one. And then, after graduation, of course, the entire 2012 season.
So I want to briefly I want to diverge off on a tangent for just a second. People talk about how varsity athletics needs to be separated from the university process. And here you and I are with a lot of history at this university. I have 2 graduate degrees from here. You have a degree from here. We've gained a tremendous amount from our educations at this university. And yet the things that we both fix on. Probably more true for you than for me. Like my best memories here are mixed between sporting events and educational things. But the idea that varsity athletics doesn't matter to the recruiting process, to the university culture, and so forth, and the idea that we shouldn't be spending that money spent on the head football coach's contract, for example, to use a hot stove issue from recently. The idea that a university should not concern itself with these kinds of things, or that coaches are overpaid, is ridiculous, in my opinion. There's a reason that Alabama's application numbers are so high right now. It's because everybody wants to go to a school where you go watch a winning team every single Saturday. And, you know, I have respect for Alabama as an institution, and I'll leave off there. And to say that I wish we were doing it the way they are in terms of, and I think that hiring a coach like Jimbo Fisher with a national championship pedigree was unquestionably a wonderful move.
Of course.
And if he had cost $150 million, I would have said, pay it, and I'll make a donation. And so anyway, I'll get off my soapbox now. We typically end each interview with a little bit of good bull. This is an opportunity to recognize someone else for something good or great that they have done. Do you have anyone that you would like to send some good bull?
I would like to recognize Jack Gouge, who was class of 2011.
Okay.
And he was in the Corps. He was in I think he was in Outlaw 8 was his company, and he has been serving the country ever since then as a in the United States Air Force, and he has been out there protecting our freedoms for years, and I appreciate it.
We want him on that wall.
Yes, we do.
We need him on that wall. So, David, thank you for taking the time to stop by and visit with us a little bit.
Thanks for having me.
We appreciate you, and thank you also to our listeners for tuning in. Thank you so much for watching. If you would like to stay up to date on our latest videos, be sure to subscribe and hit the bell icon to receive notifications. If you're in a rush or on the road, you can still join us on iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you find your podcasts. If you want to learn more about us or our guests, please visit our website at mays.tamu.edu/podcasts. Also, please check out Mays Business School's academic programs. They're the sponsors of our show, and you can find them in the description. Thanks, and gig 'em.